She wasn't supposed to be there. A woman, alone, defending a man the town had already condemned. But what she discovered would shake the courtroom and the town to its core. You won't believe what happened next. Thank you so much for watching. And for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from, and why you're following this. The scorching Texas sun beat down on Fort Worth as Sarah Montgomery stepped off the train. It was the summer of 1871, and the dusty frontier town bustled with activity. Cowboys, merchants, and settlers moved about their business, barely noticing. The slender woman, in a modest blue traveling dress, clutching her leather satchel containing law books and personal documents. Sarah was 32, educated back east, and had practiced law in Boston for 5 years before deciding to move west. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her green eyes surveyed the town with determination. She had come to Texas, not just to escape the whispers about a woman practicing law in Boston, but because she believed the frontier needed good legal minds. "Miss Montgomery?" A voice called out from the crowd. She turned to see Judge William Parker, a stout man with a gray beard and kind eyes. They had corresponded for months before he agreed to let her work as his clerk while she established herself in town. "Judge Parker, a pleasure to finally meet you in person." Sarah extended her hand, which he shook firmly. "The pleasure is mine, though I must warn you, Fort Worth isn't Boston. Folks here have strong opinions about a woman practicing law." Sarah nodded. "I'm well aware, Judge, but opinions can change with time and results." As they walked toward his carriage, the judge lowered his voice. "There's a case coming up. A Comanche man named Running Wolf has been accused of stealing horses from the Hamilton Ranch. The evidence is flimsy at best, but sentiment against Indians runs high here. And no one will defend him?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "No one's willing to risk their reputation. The town council's already decided he's guilty." Something in Sarah stirred. "Perhaps I could review the case?" "As your clerk, of course." Judge Parker gave her a knowing look. "That's why I mentioned it. You've got nothing to lose here yet." Later that evening, in the small room she'd rented, above the general store, Sarah read through the case files by lamplight. Running Wolf had been found near the Hamilton Ranch the day after 3 prized horses disappeared. No stolen horses were recovered. No witnesses saw him take them, but his presence alone was deemed sufficient evidence. The next morning, Sarah visited the jail. Sheriff Thompson eyed her suspiciously when she requested to see the prisoner. "Ma'am, this ain't a proper place for a lady," he said, chewing on a toothpick. "I'm here on legal business, Sheriff. Judge Parker sent me." Reluctantly, he led her to the cell where Running Wolf sat. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 25, with long black hair and proud features. His dark eyes watched her cautiously. "My name is Sarah Montgomery. I'm a lawyer," she said, standing tall despite the sheriff's scoff behind her. "I'd like to help with your case, if you'll allow it." Running Wolf studied her for a long moment. "Why would a white woman help me?" "Because everyone deserves a fair trial, regardless of who they are or where they come from." He continued to stare at her, then spoke in perfect English. "I did not take those horses. I was tracking a mountain lion that had been killing our livestock." "Then we need to prove that," Sarah replied. "Will you tell me everything that happened that day?" For an hour, Running Wolf explained his movements, describing landmarks and times. Sarah listened intently, taking notes, asking clarifying questions. As she prepared to leave, she promised to return the following day. Outside, whispers followed her down the street. "That's her, the Boston woman talking to the Indian." Sarah kept her head high, ignoring the stares and murmurs. In her room that night, she reviewed her notes, formulating a defense strategy. The next morning, Sarah rode out to the Hamilton Ranch, accompanied by Deputy Mills, a young man who seemed less prejudiced than most. Mr. Hamilton, a burly man with a weathered face, greeted them with suspicion. I heard someone was fool enough to defend that Comanche, he spat. Didn't expect it to be a woman. Mr. Hamilton, Sarah began politely, I'm investigating all aspects of this case. Could you show me where the horses were kept and describe exactly what you found when you discovered them missing? Grudgingly, Hamilton led them to the corral. Gate was open, just like that. Found Indian tracks heading east. Sarah examined the gate, noticing something unusual. These marks here, they look like the latch was pried open with a metal tool. Hamilton shrugged. Indians have knives. May I see the tracks you found? Sarah asked. They followed Hamilton to a spot near the tree line. The tracks were partially obscured now, but Sarah could still make out moccasin prints. Did you follow these tracks? Where did they lead? Hamilton hesitated. Lost him after half a mile. Ground gets rocky. Sarah nodded, making notes. And no one actually saw Running Wolf take the horses? Don't need to see it. Everyone knows Indians steal horses. As they rode back to town, Deputy Mills spoke quietly. Miss Montgomery, folks won't take kindly to you defending him. I'm aware, Deputy, but kindness isn't what justice requires. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived with tension hanging in the air like the summer humidity. Sarah had spent every waking moment preparing, interviewing potential witnesses, and building her case. The courthouse, a modest two-story building in the center of town, was packed with curious and hostile onlookers. Sarah arrived early, dressed in her most professional black skirt and jacket. She waited outside the jail as Running Wolf was escorted out in shackles. The sheriff had refused her request to have them removed, despite her protests that it prejudiced the proceedings. I will do everything in my power to ensure you receive a fair hearing, she told Running Wolf quietly. He nodded slightly. My people are watching. If I am hanged for something I did not do, there will be consequences. Sarah understood the implications. Tensions between settlers and the Comanche were already at a breaking point. This case could be the spark that ignited violence. As they approached the courthouse, the crowd parted reluctantly, hurling insults. Sarah heard the words Indian lover and worse, but kept her eyes forward. In a moment of defiance that would later be recounted throughout the town, she reached out and took Running Wolf's shackled hand, guiding him up the courthouse steps. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Judge Parker, watching from the courthouse door, shook his head slightly, but Sarah detected a hint of admiration in his eyes. Inside the courtroom, Sarah sat beside Running Wolf at the defense table. Across the aisle, District Attorney Thomas Buchanan shuffled his papers with confidence. He was a tall, imposing man known for his theatrical courtroom style and unbroken record of convictions against Indian defendants. Judge Parker called the court to order. This is a preliminary hearing in the case of the Territory versus Running Wolf on the charge of horse theft. Mr. Buchanan, you may present the Territory's case. Buchanan rose smoothly. Your Honor, the facts are simple. 3 valuable horses were stolen from the Hamilton Ranch on the night of June 15th. Defendant was apprehended near the property the following morning. Mr. Hamilton will testify that Indian tracks were found leading from his corral eastward, in the direction of the Comanche encampment. The Territory requests that this case proceed to trial. Judge Parker nodded. Miss Montgomery, do you wish to respond? Sarah stood, acutely aware of every eye in the courtroom. Your Honor, the defense will demonstrate that there is insufficient evidence to bring this case to trial. Mr. Hamilton found tracks, but no stolen horses were recovered. My client was tracking a mountain lion that had been preying on livestock, an alibi that can be corroborated. Buchanan interrupted with a dismissive wave. Your Honor, the word of an Indian is as valid as any other citizens under the law, Sarah finished firmly. And I have additional evidence to present. Judge Parker gestured for her to continue. Sarah called her first witness, Deputy Mills. Deputy, when we visited the Hamilton Ranch, what did you observe about the corral gate? The young deputy shifted. Uncomfortably. There were marks on the latch, ma'am. Looked like it had been pried open with something metal. And would you say that's consistent with Comanche methods of taking horses? No, ma'am. In my experience, Indians are skilled enough to open gates without leaving such marks. Buchanan rose. Objection, Your Honor. The deputy is not an expert on Indian horse-stealing techniques. I've lived in this territory my whole life, Mr. Buchanan. Mills replied before the judge could rule. And I've investigated dozens of actual Indian raids. Sarah continued. Deputy Mills, in your professional opinion, were those tracks clear enough to positively identify as Comanche? No, ma'am. They were moccasin tracks, but many frontiersmen wear moccasins too. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Sarah's next. Witness was John Two Bears, a Comanche who had adopted many white ways and worked as a translator. He testified that Running Wolf had indeed been assigned to track a mountain lion that had killed several of their horses. And why didn't Running Wolf tell this to Sheriff Thompson when he was arrested? Sarah asked. Sheriff did not ask. Two Bears replied simply. He saw a Comanche near White Man's Ranch and decided guilt immediately. Sarah's final witness was Dr. Anderson, the town physician who had examined the tracks at her request. Doctor, based on your measurements of the footprints found at the Hamilton Ranch and those of Running Wolf, what can you tell us? The prints at the ranch were smaller by nearly an inch than those made by the defendant, Dr. Anderson stated. I cannot say with scientific certainty that Running Wolf did not make those tracks, but they are inconsistent with his foot size. As Sarah built her case piece by piece, she could feel the mood in the courtroom shifting. Doubt was creeping in where certainty had reigned. When she finally called Running Wolf himself to testify, the courtroom fell silent. I was tracking a mountain lion, he stated clearly. My people had lost 3 horses to this cat. I followed it for 2 days. Its trail led near the White Man's Ranch, but I never approached their horses. Did you see anyone else in the area? Sarah asked. Running Wolf nodded. 2 men on horseback, heading east with several horses. They were white men. I hid because I knew they would blame me if they saw me. Could you identify these men if you saw them again? One had a scar across his cheek. The other was missing 2 fingers on his left hand. Sarah turned to Judge Parker. Your Honor, this description matches the Carson brothers, known horse thieves who operated in the Oklahoma Territory last year. I request time to investigate this lead before any decision is made about proceeding to trial. Judge Parker considered for a moment, then nodded. This court will recess for 3 days to allow for further investigation. The defendant will remain in custody. As the courtroom emptied, Sarah gathered her papers, aware of the mixed reactions around her. Some people looked thoughtful, others angry. Buchanan approached her table. Impressive performance, Miss Montgomery, he said quietly, but you're making powerful enemies. Hamilton has friends on the town council. I'm not here to make friends. Mr. Buchanan, I'm here to ensure justice. His expression hardened. Justice is what the people decided is out here, not what some Eastern woman thinks it should be. As Sarah watched Running Wolf being led back to jail, she knew the real battle was just beginning. She had created reasonable doubt in the courtroom. But changing hearts and minds would prove far more difficult. The 3 days granted by Judge Parker passed in a whirlwind of activity. Sarah, working with Deputy Mills, sent telegrams to lawmen throughout the region seeking information on the Carson brothers. She interviewed ranchers who had suffered similar thefts, carefully building a pattern that pointed away from Comanche involvement. By the second day, she had received responses confirming the Carson brothers had been spotted in the region. One telegram from a marshal in Oklahoma reported they were suspected of stealing horses and selling them to Army outposts under false papers. That evening, as Sarah was returning to her room, A rock shattered her window, narrowly missing her head. Attached was a note: "Leave town or join your Indian friend at the end of a rope." She reported the incident to Sheriff Thompson, who seemed less than concerned. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, Miss Montgomery," he said. "Can't say I'm surprised. Is this how justice works in Fort Worth, Sheriff? Through intimidation?" He shrugged. "Justice works how folks want it to work. And folks here don't want some outsider woman defending Indians." Despite the threat, Sarah continued her investigation. On the morning of the third day, Deputy Mills rushed to her office with news. "Miss Montgomery, we found them. The Carson brothers were spotted trying to sell horses to a trader in Dallas. The description matches the Hamilton horses." Sarah's heart raced. "Have they been arrested?" "Not yet. But the Dallas sheriff is watching them. He's waiting for confirmation before moving in." Sarah quickly wrote a detailed description of the Hamilton horses, including distinctive markings that only the owner would know. She sent it by express rider to Dallas, then went to inform Judge Parker. The judge listened carefully to her report. "This is promising, Miss Montgomery, but not conclusive. We'll reconvene tomorrow as planned." That night, Sarah visited Running Wolf in his cell. He sat cross-legged on the floor, seemingly at peace despite his circumstances. "We may have found the real thieves," she told him, "but I can't promise what will happen tomorrow." Running Wolf nodded. "You have done more than anyone expected. My people are grateful. I haven't won your freedom yet. You have shown that not all white people see us as animals or thieves. That is a different kind of freedom." Sarah hesitated, then asked a question that had been troubling her. "If you are released, what will you do? Return to your people?" "My people are caught between two worlds," he said thoughtfully. "The old ways are disappearing like morning mist. Some fight against this change. Others, like me, seek to understand the new world. Only through understanding can we survive. And if understanding fails?" Sarah asked softly. Running Wolf's eyes held a sadness that struck her deeply. "Then my people will vanish from the earth, remembered only in your books and stories." The next morning, the courthouse was even more crowded than before. News of the Carson brothers had spread through town, creating a buzz of speculation. Sarah arrived to find Judge Parker already seated, his expression grave. "Before we begin," the judge announced, "I have received communication from the sheriff in Dallas. The Carson brothers were indeed found with 3 horses matching the description of those stolen from the Hamilton ranch." A murmur ran through the crowd. Sarah felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly tempered by the judge's next words. "However, they claim to have purchased these horses legitimately from a Comanche trader." District Attorney Buchanan rose immediately. "Your Honor, this only confirms our case. The defendant stole the horses and then sold them to these men." Sarah stood. "That's speculation, Your Honor. The Carsons are known horse thieves with outstanding warrants in Oklahoma. Their word is hardly reliable." Judge Parker raised his hand for silence. "I'm inclined to agree with Miss Montgomery on this point. However, we need more conclusive evidence before dismissing the charges." At that moment, the courthouse doors burst open. Deputy Mills entered, followed by a tall, distinguished-looking man in an army uniform. "Your Honor," Mills called out, "Captain James Bennett from Fort Richardson has evidence relevant to this case." The judge nodded for the captain to approach. After being sworn in, Captain Bennett addressed the court. "Yesterday, we apprehended 2 men attempting to sell us horses with altered brands. Under questioning, they admitted to stealing horses from several ranches in the area, including the Hamilton property." "These men," Sarah asked quickly, "were they the Carson brothers?" "Yes, ma'am. They specifically mentioned framing a Comanche to divert suspicion. They even planted moccasin tracks leading from the Hamilton ranch." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Judge Parker hammered his gavel repeatedly until order was restored. Captain, are you prepared to sign an affidavit to this effect? I already have, Your Honor. He handed a document to the judge. Judge Parker reviewed it carefully, then looked up. In light of this new evidence, this court dismisses all charges against the defendant, Running Wolf. He is to be released immediately. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. She turned to Running Wolf, who remained stoic, though she could see the tension leaving his shoulders. Not everyone shared in the moment of justice. Hamilton stood up from his seat, face flushed with anger. This is an outrage. You can't trust the word of horse thieves over God-fearing settlers. Indians have been stealing from us for years. Mr. Hamilton, Judge Parker replied firmly, the evidence clearly exonerates the defendant. Your horses will be returned to you once they're transported from Fort Richardson. As the courtroom gradually emptied, Sarah gathered her papers, aware of the mixed reactions around her. Some people nodded respectfully in her direction, while others glared openly. Running Wolf, now unshackled, approached her. Thank you, Sarah Montgomery. My people will not forget what you have done. I only did what any lawyer should do, she replied, though they both knew few would have taken his case. Outside the courthouse, Sarah and Running Wolf were met by a small group of Comanche who had come to witness the proceedings. An elder stepped forward, his weathered face solemn. The woman lawyer has a strong heart, he said in his native tongue, which Running Wolf translated. We will remember her name in our stories. Sarah felt humbled by his words. Please tell him I was honored to stand for justice, regardless of who needed it. As Running Wolf prepared to leave with his people, he turned to Sarah one last time. You have made enemies here, but also friends. Be watchful. She nodded, understanding the warning. In defending Running Wolf, she had challenged not just the law, but deeply held prejudices. The battle for justice was far from over. The weeks following Running Wolf's release brought both challenges and unexpected opportunities for Sarah Montgomery. As he had warned, she had indeed made enemies. Several potential clients canceled their appointments, unwilling to be represented by the Indian lawyer. Mr. Hamilton and his friends on the town council made it clear she wasn't welcome at social gatherings, yet for every door that closed, another seemed to open. Judge Parker, impressed by her diligence and legal acumen, began assigning her cases that other lawyers avoided, disputes involving immigrants, women seeking divorces from abusive husbands, and poor farmers fighting against wealthy landowners. One crisp autumn morning, Sarah arrived at her small office to find Running Wolf waiting outside. He wore a mix of traditional Comanche clothing and white man's attire, buckskin leggings with a cotton shirt and vest. Running Wolf, she greeted him with surprise. I didn't expect to see you again. I have come with a purpose, he replied. My people face a new threat. The agent at our reservation is stealing our supplies and selling them. Children go hungry while he grows rich. Sarah invited him inside, away from curious onlookers. That's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence? We have kept records as you white people do. He placed a leather pouch on her desk. These show what was promised and what was received. The differences are great. Sarah examined the papers. A meticulous accounting written in surprisingly neat handwriting. Who kept these records? I did, Running Wolf said. After my trial, I realized we must use white man's tools to fight white man's injustice. Sarah nodded, impressed by his foresight. This won't be easy. Indian agents have powerful friends in Washington, so we have heard. That is why we need someone who is not afraid to stand against power. Sarah considered the implications. Taking this case would further alienate her from Fort Worth society, possibly closing more doors. Yet she couldn't ignore such blatant corruption. I'll need to investigate further, she said finally. Gather more evidence, find witnesses willing to testify. Running Wolf nodded. I will help. There are others, white traders, a doctor who visits our reservation who have seen the truth. Over the following days, Sarah interviewed these witnesses. Dr. Miller, who provided medical care at the reservation, confirmed that malnutrition was rampant despite official reports of adequate supplies. 2 honest traders testified that they had seen reservation goods being sold in distant towns. As Sarah built her case, word spread of her new crusade. One evening, Judge Parker invited her to his home to discuss the matter privately. "You're swimming in dangerous waters, Sarah," he said, pouring her a cup of tea. "Indian Agent Collins has connections all the way to the governor's office. Are you advising me to drop the case, Judge?" He sighed heavily. "As a judge, I'm bound to tell you that the evidence you've gathered merits investigation. As your friend, I'm concerned for your future and your safety. I appreciate your concern, but I can't ignore this injustice." Judge Parker studied her for a moment. "You know, when you first arrived, I thought you were just another idealistic Easterner who would run home at the first sign of trouble. I'm pleased to have been wrong. The frontier needs justice as much as the East, perhaps more so," Sarah replied. The judge nodded thoughtfully. "I've received a letter from the Federal Circuit Court. They're sending an investigator next month to review several cases involving Indian affairs. Your timing may be fortunate." This news gave Sarah renewed hope. With federal involvement, local political connections might hold less sway. The following week, Sarah was working late in her office when she heard a crash and smelled smoke. Rushing to the window, she saw flames licking up the side of her building. She grabbed her most important documents, including Running Wolf's evidence, and fled down the stairs as smoke filled the hallway. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Deputy Mills organized a bucket brigade while Sheriff Thompson questioned onlookers. Sarah watched in dismay as the fire consumed the building that housed her office. "Anyone see how it started?" Thompson asked the crowd. An elderly man stepped forward, saw 2 men toss something through her window. They rode off toward the Hamilton ranch. Sarah's eyes met the sheriff's. For once, he seemed genuinely troubled. "Miss Montgomery, perhaps you should consider—" "I'm not leaving, Sheriff," she interrupted firmly. "And I'm not dropping my case." Word of the fire spread quickly through town. By morning, something unexpected had occurred. Public opinion began to shift. Many townsfolk who had previously avoided Sarah now expressed outrage at the attack. The local newspaper, which had been critical of her defense of Running Wolf, published a strong editorial condemning the arson as an attack on the very foundations of justice. 3 days later, Dr. Miller offered Sarah space in his medical office to continue her work. Several townspeople helped salvage what they could from the burned building and brought furniture to her new location. When Running Wolf learned of the fire, he came to town with several members of his tribe. They brought her a beautifully crafted Comanche medicine shield as a symbol of protection. "Our enemies think fire will frighten you away," he said. "They do not understand that fire also strengthens and purifies." Sarah was touched by the gesture. "I won't abandon this fight." "We know," he replied simply. "That is why we trust you." The federal investigator, a serious man named Harrington, arrived the following week. After reviewing Sarah's evidence, he launched a formal investigation into Agent Collins's activities. Within days, witnesses who had previously been silent came forward. Emboldened by federal protection, Agent Collins was arrested attempting to flee the territory. The investigation uncovered a network of corruption extending to several territorial officials. Sarah's persistence had exposed not just one corrupt agent, but an entire system preying on those least able to defend themselves. On a warm spring day, nearly a year after Sarah had first arrived in Fort Worth, she stood on the courthouse steps, addressing a crowd that included settlers, townspeople, and a delegation of Comanche led by Running Wolf. "Today's ruling by the federal court marks a new beginning," she announced. "The appointment of a new Indian agent, jointly approved by territorial officials and tribal leaders, represents a step toward true justice for all people of this territory. Running Wolf stepped forward to stand beside her. A murmur went through the crowd. A white woman and a Comanche man standing as equals was still a powerful image. "The path of understanding between our peoples is long," Running Wolf said, his voice carrying across the square. "But today we walk it together." Later, as the crowd dispersed, Judge Parker approached Sarah. "You've done remarkable work this past year, Miss Montgomery. The governor has asked me to offer you a position as special counsel for Indian affairs." Sarah was momentarily speechless. "That's unexpected." "Not to me," the judge smiled. "The frontier is changing. We need people who see justice as something that belongs to everyone, not just those who look like us." Sarah glanced toward Running Wolf, who was speaking with his people. "I've learned that justice requires more than just good laws. It requires courage to stand against prejudice, even when it costs us dearly." "And you've paid such costs," Judge Parker acknowledged. "Not compared to what others have endured," she replied. "This is just the beginning of a much longer journey." As the sun set over Fort Worth, Sarah Montgomery walked through streets that had once been hostile, but now held a measure of respect for her. The frontier was indeed changing, and she had found her place in that change, not as an outsider bringing Eastern ideas, but as someone who had learned from the land and its diverse peoples what justice truly meant. She had come west seeking purpose and had found it in the most unexpected place, standing beside a Comanche man in a Texas courtroom, proving that justice could transcend the boundaries of race and prejudice. In the process, she had not only changed herself but had begun to change the world around her, one case at a time.